Two amazing sports cars, one video where we ask the question, which one should you buy? On my left, the Porsche 911, and on my right, the Lotus Evora. Now if you're in the market for either of these two cars, then you've got excellent taste. Car and Driver said of the 911 Gen 2 Carrera at launch that it was an ideal sports car, providing a blend of exhilarating driving dynamics with everyday comfort and practicality. Whilst Motor Trend said the Evora S delivered a sublime steering feel and a deeper, more satisfying exhaust note, making it a thrilling car to drive on both the street and the track. High praise indeed, but often journalists are given one of these cars for just a short period of time, and often when they were very new. They're off in some exotic location being wined and dined, so I often think their opinions are slightly biased. So, after 16 years of this Porsche 911 and 13 years down the line with this, and a fair few miles under their belt as well, what's it really like owning and driving these cars? Let's start with the Lotus. The original Evora took just 2 years from initial concept to launch. That's very impressive, but obviously there were compromises. It's probably easier getting in and out of your bath than it is an Evora, especially if you're a well-proportioned person or have a slightly older frame. Early car build quality wasn't great, but this 2011 model with nearly 70,000 miles on it has fared extremely well. I'm not sure whether it's because it was built by people in a shed in Norfolk or because it's made of fiberglass, composite and glue, but if you are used to modern build car quality, the Evora will disappoint you. Once you're in it, providing you're over 5'6", it has a great driving position, and the first gen benefit from this concept car looking wraparound dash. It's cozy, like getting into a fighter jet cockpit cozy. If you're shorter than 5'6", then buy the 911. Despite its cramped cockpit, people with shorter legs will not do well with the Evora. The 911 feels more solid and it's a lot easier to get in and out of. The cabin feels more spacious compared to the Lotus. The instrumentation is well laid out. Buttons and switchgear feel strong, and it feels as though this car is built for longevity. You get more gauges too. Even in this base model Carrera, which is pretty sparse from an options perspective, you get things like the ability to adjust the seatbelt height up and down, which you don't get in the Evora. There's loads of adjustability in the seat and the steering wheel. Get one of these as a Targa with a light interior, and I imagine it'll feel even more spacious. Headroom in both cars is very impressive. Rear seat space in the Evora is okay if you're 3 or under, have no legs or identify as a soft hold all, then you're set. Whereas the back of the 911 is positively cavernous. The seats fold down too to create a lot more room for your cleaning equipment and concours trophies. So some differences then, but these cars are more similar than you may think. They're both rear wheel drive, they're both 2+2 coupes, they both have engines located behind the driver, and they both put out about the same amount of power, performance, bhp per tonne, 0 to 60 and top speed. They're also both red. The two standout differences in terms of numbers are probably the MPG. The Gen 2 uses the more efficient DFI engine used in the later 991. As a result, MPG possible is mid to late 20s, whereas the Lotus, with its supercharged, earlier engineered 3.5 litre Toyota V6, will probably get an MPG in the late teens to low 20s. This is also echoed in the UK car tax bracket too. This 911 will cost you £415 per year to tax in the UK, versus the Lotus's £700 plus car tax. In terms of spec, the base model Gen 2 doesn't get much in terms of other 911s in the 997 range, this being the Carrera, but it still compares very similarly to the Lotus. Both cars have power steering, electric windows, doubled in factory fitted navigation units, an onboard MPG computer. This particular Gen 2 comes with a couple of optional extras, a rear wiper, upgraded Carrera S 19-inch wheels and a Porsche sports exhaust, whereas the Evora S just came with a sport button. You also get a few more gauges on the 911 for oil pressure and temperature, whereas the Lotus with its tech pack gives you a tyre pressure monitoring system, which is useful if you want to become paranoid about having correctly inflated tyres. This Evora does have cruise control and heated seats in a Lotus, which that 911 doesn't have. The 997, despite evolving from the first water-cooled 996, gives the best of all worlds in terms of driver feel and modernish comfort. It comes from a time of peak car. You may think 911s are fairly commonplace, and while that's true, 997 Gen 2s with a manual gearbox, they're not so common. They're pretty rare. They're like golden ticket rare. Just go and search and see how many you can find for sale. The Evora in this guise wasn't around long. Later 400 models kept roughly the same recipe but beefed up the front and the rear. There's no pedigree with an Evora. It is very good looking. It has a deceptively elegant design, but with so few on the roads, many people won't know what it is. Evoras are rare, full stop. They didn't sell very many of them. Not compared to Emiras anyway. There's a lot more new Emiras on the road. So your chances of seeing another Evora coming the opposite way in front of you are next to none. The 911 has been around for 60 years. The front on this 997 does still, if you squint, look a little bit like a Beetle. And, good or bad, everyone will know what it is. They'll either love you for it or they'll hate you. Servicing costs for both cars are very similar. Expect to pay about £400 at a Lotus or Porsche specialist for a minor service, and anything up to £900 to £1,000 for a major service. Tyres are also a similar price. The 911 is running Michelin Pilot Sports. They're 19-inch on the front. They're about £140 each. The rears are a little bit wider. I think they're 230 wide on the rear. They're about £270 each. The fronts on this Evora are the same dimensions as the Carrera S wheels on the 911. Again, 19 inches, so £140 each, albeit the Continentals on there. Whereas the rears are 20-inch. They're not as wide as the 911, only 285, so they're a little bit cheaper, about £230 each. Evoras have depreciated. They're rare and a bit unique, which probably puts more unsuspecting people off. So the buyer pool is naturally quite small, but values, although going down, are doing so, I think, at a much slower rate than the 911, especially the 997. Post-COVID car boom prices for the 997s are long gone. People who know these models well are demanding rebuild evidence on Gen 1s. Consequently, the prices have fallen a lot in the last 12 to 18 months. I test drove a fairly ropey Gen 1 997 just over a year ago, and the guy was okay with 19k for it, which I thought was a good price, having a sub 20k 997. But now the market is literally brimming with sub 20k 997s. Both these cars have enthusiast following, which is great. There's also plenty of specialists out there, but there are probably more Porsche specialists out there than there are Lotus specialists. In traffic, the 911 is fine. It's easy to come off the clutch, leave it in a low gear first or second, take your foot off the pedals and let it drive along itself. The clutch is heavy, but it's kind of to be expected, and it's not too bad. In traffic, the Evora is okay. The gearbox is probably a bit more notchy than the 911. Clutch is a little bit softer, but it's sort of got a sharper bite, and the pedals are close together. Unless you're wearing driving shoes, sometimes your ankle, which is touching the floor because the pedals are so close, can be a little bit uncomfortable. B roads are what these cars are about. they both do it really well. The Evora is more poised, it's easier to feed the inputs in. The 911 is chunky, it's German, it's solid. You have to really put yourself into it, and it rewards you just some really, really fun rear-engined, rear-wheel drive feel. It's so good. They both love the twisty stuff. The Lotus is quite supple at motorway speeds. You do still feel bumps in the road, but it is a very comfortable ride. You do sit very low down, and that does make you feel a little bit vulnerable, especially if you're on a busy motorway and there's lots of big trucks around. On the motorway, the 911 is also a bit firm. You do still feel the bumps through the suspension. There's no PASM in this car, it's very standard, but it's not too bad. The driving position, the open, airy, I'm going to say more spacious cabin makes it feel okay. Which should you buy? If you want something exotic and British that you can pretend to your mates down the pub that you've got a mini McLaren, buy the Lotus. Whereas if you want something subtle to convey yourself from A to B and refine German solidity in what is undeniably the world's most eminent and infamous sports car, then buy the 911, or just sack them both off and buy a Cayman and a Golf GTI.